We were immersed into ignorance. There's a pretty dark history there with humanity and how much has been lost. People aren't backing down now. There is a new paradigm that is emerging, and it looks really empowering if people are willing to open up their minds to greater possibilities. We need to help people wake up to the fact that this is real, that these psychic abilities are a real thing. That there's nothing like seeing it with your own eyes that convinces somebody.
Theresa, welcome back to the podcast. So lovely to have you back on the show.
Thank you, guys. It's a pleasure to be back. It's been a while, so I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, beautiful. And I thought it seems to be such a hot topic at the moment around planetary shifts, technological shifts. There's so much happening, and it's easy to get, I guess, pulled into any of it. But when you look out, what do you see? Do you see we losing ourselves or finding ourselves?
I think that's a very individual question. But yeah, I mean, definitely the world is changing at a very rapid pace, and some of that is technologically driven, like where the pace of change is just on this, it's gone beyond the exponential and into the vertical practically in terms of how fast things are moving. And it can be very easy to get so caught up in all of that, or to just keep trying to keep track, trying to keep up with it. And for those who are just getting caught up in the outer world, and that the outer world, which is demanding so much attention, I would say that's easy to lose oneself in that, if you get so caught up in what's going on outwardly. But for those who are, seeking inward and also seeking, I think I've found more and more people over the last year and a half that I've encountered that are waking up right now. And they're just normal people having their normal job. They never would have been interested in these types of subjects, whether it's, metaphysical things or extraterrestrial things, or, just asking deeper questions. And there's more and more people starting to search and starting to seek. And I think they have more at their fingertips to be able to discover if they choose, right? So those people, I think, are finding themselves. So it's really an individual, whether you're losing yourself or finding yourself, I think comes down to what are you putting your attention towards?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what do you feel we're waking up to? Like, what is it waking up? Because quite often we can speak to people, and if they're removed from this, there's no connection to this in any shape or form. But once you're on the path and things are opening up for you, it becomes a very different story.
Mm. Well, I think for one thing, they're waking up to that there's a lot more going on than what is generally communicated in the media, right? They're starting to see that there's a veil or there's a curtain, and they're starting to open that curtain and peer beyond it, and realize that if you just dig enough, that you can recognize that there's a whole different story going on behind the scenes than what you're told or fed by the mainstream narratives. And, whether, so I think COVID actually did people, gave people the opportunity to dive deeper in, right? So a lot of people started going down some rabbit holes during that time. And, but even since COVID, like even just over the last year, with some of the UAP stuff that's been getting a lot more attention, like people are starting to like go, wow, this is really a real thing. And they're starting to get curious, and they're digging more. And so there's more, like once they start getting curious and start asking questions and searching, and I think even AI is giving people more a new tool. It's going to be used as a tool to, towards good and towards ill, just depending on how people choose to use it. But it's making the ability to search, different than it was before. So there's a change. I think that people really need to be discerning still. So even while more knowledge and information is available at our fingertips, like we have to still be discerning and not, give away that discernment to just AI, for example, to make up, one's opinions about things, because it's clearly programmed and has its own biases just
Oh
based
yeah.
on its, even if human bias, because it's drawing from the internet to give you its references and its summaries and so forth. So therefore, it's going to reflect human biases, and in addition to its programming. But I think there's still really interesting things that can be discovered through using it as a new search tool, for example.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you obviously went through the, if I'm not mistaken, through the mystery school teachings, which is
Yeah.
and the teachings of the Kabbalah. Is that Hermeticism and the Kabbalah in there as well, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken? Or
So my personal path has been with the Modern Mystery School, and we study all sorts of ancient metaphysical teachings, from Hermetics, ancient Hermetics, to alchemy, Kabbalah, astrology, but also, just life. Like, what is it? Who are we? And what is our place in this world and in this life, and even beyond this world? So, we ask a lot of the really deep metaphysical questions, and we explore those questions from various angles. But then, how do we live the principles of this ancient wisdom in our day to day lives versus just have the knowledge? It's not just about study, it's about really living it.
and did they have any thoughts about what is happening in this particular time in history? Because there seems to be across many different teachings, indigenous people are all kind of everyone's leaning into this point in time that we're in right now. I'm always curious about this.
Yeah, exactly. I think that so many ancient traditions around the world, whether you're looking at the Hermetica, and it's that's sort of, there's prophecies within that. There's prophecies within the Bible. There's a Native American tradition, the Hopi, the Mayans, right? That they all have. I mean, the mystery school tradition itself has had a long history of various prophecies or prophetic kind of pointing to a time when there would be great turmoil, but on the other side of that, there would be great breakthroughs. And that, so I would say from the mystery school perspective, the the prophecies would say, yeah, okay, it might get worse before it gets better. But what we're aiming for on the other side is to create a world of peace, to create a world of greater balance and harmony. We call it Shambhala. That's sort of a term that comes from the ancient Tibetan tradition. Actually, they had the original Shambhala, which was more this like kind of a enlightened society of all the people, and the leaders in particular were very wise and very spiritually enlightened. And then that was kind of the equivalent to the Garden of Eden idea from the Western tradition, that or the first world of the Hopi, where they talk about, originally humanity was much closer to the spiritual realm, and we had much more direct contact. And because of that, we could live in greater peace and greater level of awareness face to face, right? Living face to face with the divine versus being veiled from it. But then at some point, we in all these different stories, of the origin stories, then we fell, or we kind of got veiled in various layers, or we kind of descended from that pure sort of spiritual way of being, and we came into more and more density, more and more ego, more and more strife. And but they always talked about there would be this point where we'd have a return, where we would kind of reach about as far away from God as we could get. and and then there would be, there, like, a lot of the prophecies of future kind of stuff are not like saying this is exactly what's going to happen. It's more like saying these are warning signs. This is what potentially could happen. And, so they have certain markers. Sometimes it's very symbolic and has to be interpreted. Sometimes it's very kind of direct. But so they would say that there'd be like a big world change, a big final kind of battle between forces of good and evil, if you will. But then on the other side of it, they would say that we would we would break through, and that humanity would realize that almost like there's an opening, right? The veils being opened up, and the curtains are being pulled. And I think that, if you look at what's happening in the world today, so much of what has been prophesied is happening right now. Like even just at a very political level, there's more and more push for transparency than there ever has been before. And there's more being revealed than has ever been before. And I think because of the internet and technologies, like even the fact that everybody has smartphones today and can capture things on video right away, like it's harder and harder for um, things to remain hidden. And so there's this truth that's being revealed. So from the mystery school's perspective, the whole reason the mystery school even opened up its doors to go from being kind of behind the scenes, closed door, invite only, to opening the doors, that happened in 1997. And at that time, it was sort of like this instruction of no more secrets, right? We're moving into a time of no more secrets. It's time for the doors to be opened. The veils are being lifted, and people are waking up, like more and more recognition of the narrative that we've been fed by sort of the mundane matrix way of life is a lie. And they're realizing that, okay, we have to understand what's really going on. What's the true story? What's the true history? And all of these things are being, they're there now. They're available for people to find if they ask the right questions and they search in the right ways while still maintaining their own discernment.
Yeah, no, beautifully said. I mean, the truth is the truth, isn't it? But sometimes when it's revealed to us, we're so attached to our identity and belief systems, we
Yeah.
buck against it and say, I don't want to
Yeah.
know that, you
Yeah,
know?
true. Yeah, your beliefs kind of form your identity, and your identity is the thing that your ego is going to protect the most, right? Is to protect the identity and that sense of individuality. And if our sense of identity starts to be challenged, and if our beliefs are challenged, um, you have to reevaluate who you think you are, what you're doing with your life, whether it's the right thing to be doing or not. And some people would rather just stay in what's familiar and comfortable rather than be challenged to reevaluate and consider different, way of viewing things. And but there it's choice, right? So it's a choice as to whether someone wants to grow or whether they want to just stay in what's familiar and comfortable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what's coming to me, and the question I'd like to ask you is around this, is that why? Because I look at my journey and it just, especially these last 10 years, has just kind of been opening up in an acceleration and going deeper within that I just didn't know any of this was possible. Like my rugby playing Welshman in me is so far removed to where I am at this moment in time.
Yeah.
And there's a part of me that questions like, well, why wasn't I ever shown any of this as a kid or taught this, or why isn't it imbued in our culture? Or is it that we as a species we're not ready for it in some ways? Like, what are your thoughts on this? Because now I can go like I've just bought a book on Drumville Melchizedek, Flower of Life, Volume 3. And the
Yeah.
information in that is mind blowing. I'm like, this is phenomenal. And I can just go out and buy a book where 20 years ago, obviously, I couldn't
Mm,
really do that so easily, you know.
mm.
So I was wondering what your thoughts are. Have we been denied it, or is this just something that we're now ready for? What do you think?
Well, no, I think that there has been a systematic effort to suppress certain information. And, if you just look at history, right, there's been a history of inquisitions, witch hunts, claiming anything that was heretical, right, that was alternative to the mainstream power of the day, whether that was the church or a certain, you know, political power or, some other religious authority, or the education system, right? Our education system has been, I think in today's world and the media between the media and the education system, it's feeding people a certain narrative. And you can even trace that back all the way to like Rome, even back to Egypt, right? Like the whole thing of his story, that history is being written by the victor, and they will document, how they want the optics to look, right? How it's their PR campaign of, well, we're justifying this war because they're the infidels, or they're barbarians, or, whatever it may be. And, that's how they document it. But there's more and more, um, evaluations that are coming forward of various narratives of, this was the standard history, that are being challenged today than ever before, because more things are coming to light. So for example, even just with the Ashurbanipal's library, and these archaeological discoveries that are coming, it's revealing more that has been buried for so long. And we're getting different kind of narratives and perspectives from who might have been the losers in the past because they lost the war. Some of their archives are becoming more revealed, more cuneiform, for example, and more ancient Middle East kind of revelations are being unearthed, I would say. And so I think there's a reevaluation of the historical narratives that are happening. And yet, even though we know that some of those historical narratives are not accurate, the academic system, the education system still is, doing the same old textbooks and same old narratives. And so I think there's a programming and an effort to suppress certain information. Books were burned, scrolls were burned, so this is not just, that we're now just like having an awakening to new truth and a readiness. I think there was probably readiness in the past, but there was also systematic suppression that was happening. But I
It's
do
not like
think,
we. Oh, sorry. I was going to say it's not like we just drifted into this through ignorance.
no, we were immersed into ignorance. I mean, the Dark Ages of Europe was like a prime example of being purposefully immersed into ignorance. I mean, there was more book burning that happened during that time of alternative teachings, alternative histories, and alternative practices that, it's just unfortunate. Like there was, whether it was fanaticism or uh, fear-based superstition, or just people who were not educated enough to really know any better, and so then they just fear what they don't know, and then they get a bit riotous. So there's a pretty, dark history there with humanity, and how much has been lost. But what is happening now is I think, one, because of internet, two, because of more archaeology, more revelations, new things are being discovered, even, and also because we're living, at least in the West, we're living in a place where there is more tolerance and there is more ability to practice freely, and there's less suppression in that, right? So there's more freedom to find your own way. And I think more people have, on one hand, they've moved, like there was this movement away from organized religion and more secularism, more and more educated people, right? And moving more and more towards science, which on one hand was good, but then on another hand, it went too far and people lost meaning, right? People lost a sense of morality and higher wisdom to guide them. And so now we're starting to see the pendulum swing back again, right? There's more movement back to religion and spirituality. And I think it's not just towards the new age. Like, the new age has been around for a long time, but people are kind of tired of some of the empty promises or the lack of structure that you find with some of the new age. And so there's more movement back towards, spiritual traditions that have more depth or more structure, more kind of ethical clarity to it. So there's always this pendulum swing happening. But I think humanity at a deep level knows, there's a deeper truth that needs to be revealed. And there's this, I think at a collective level, the soul of humanity is collectively crying out for, I want to know the truth and I'm tired of the lies. And and we want more equality. I don't know if equality is necessarily the right word, but we want more of an even playing field, to be able to have the opportunities, right? Equal opportunity to excel and um, to have, a chance to thrive and to live joyful lives and to have that abundance and so forth. And so, there's a push in the collective level right now for an awakening, and there's a demand almost, and there's less willingness to just take the surface level narratives that are being fed to people if they're
Yeah,
if they're they even do a little research.
yeah, no, absolutely. I totally believe that. And what's interesting is as you were speaking and talking about the deeper truths, you kept clutching your heart. And I'm like,
Yeah.
how much, like, where do you see us as a species going? Because we're so based on logic at the moment. We're so disconnected from our intuitive self, that knowing, that deeper innate wisdom within us, because we just rely on the analytical mind and logic, which is only part of the story, I feel.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can say for myself, right? So from
Mm.
my experience going so deep into the logical way of operating, I mean, I went 80 hours a week into physics as I was getting my PhD, and there was no time for anything but
80 hours a week.
80 hours a week, just
Oh.
left brain, science, research, homework, testing, right? Like there was no
Mm.
time for anything else hardly. And I went deep into just what happens when it's logic and knowledge alone. And it left me feeling really depressed. It left me feeling really disconnected from myself, and like something really important was missing in my life. And it was really challenging my well-being. So I think that led for me, it led to depression and dissatisfaction, right? And I was starting to be dissatisfied, and that dissatisfaction, it was really about grad school, but it ultimately bled into so many other areas of life. And that became the catalyst for me to search for what's going to restore balance, what's going to restore well-being, what's going to restore wellness, and meaning, right? So there's a difference between searching for wellness, right? And I think that there's a lot of people these days who have been searching for that sense of well-being, physically and mentally. That's been the real focus over the last 5 years, I would say. I mean, for a while, the health, like with diet and exercise and so forth, but now you've got all the like, how do we biohack, and how do we
Yeah.
also mental well-being, and so there's this push for this, like, how do we live optimally in a state of well-being, but that's not enough. Well-being is not inner fulfillment. And so what I realized is that I needed to find that key that was missing, that brought joy and meaning and purpose, not just well-being. And when I started to pursue, okay, so what, I realized, like, okay, I brought all these other aspects of life that bring that sense of balance and well-being back in, but something's still missing, and that thing seems to be key to joy. What is it? And that was when I realized that the spirituality was the one piece that I hadn't yet brought back in for my well-being. I had physical well-being and mental maybe, but not spiritual well-being. And so it's like I had put, a sense of connection to the spirit kind of on the shelf, because I was so much, diving into the logic and the science. And so here it was, to bring that back in. And as I brought spirit back in, I realized this was the key to a sense of passion and joy and meaning and purpose, and that deeper, what my heart started to sing again with it, right? And my creativity started to wake up again, and a sense of like, oh, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. This is my why. And so I think that, for me, it was just a very intuitive search, but I had to go so far to one extreme to realize, this isn't it, right? And something's missing, and then start searching. So I think for each individual, they really need to hit that point where they're like, something's got to change, and it's going to have to be inside of me, and I have to find that thing that's going to really feel more fulfilling and brings that greater sense of wholeness back. And ultimately, then I came to this point of, am I going to lead with my head, or am I going to lead with my heart? Right? Am I going to continue to pursue the standard not, the knowledge, the standard career that fits well within the matrix and is acceptable? Or am I going to follow my heart, which is leading me down this path of this spiritual work and becoming like a healer and a spiritual teacher and all of that? And, ultimately I had to choose what felt like was going to be the most inwardly fulfilling to me versus outwardly like the search for success type of thing. And that was the right choice. So, I think that as people make that choice, then their hearts will win out if they let it. But it's really individual. Like it is a battle, between the head and the heart.
Oh yeah, yeah. But I think every single person listening to this podcast right now is going to be going, "I know that feeling." Hence why
Yeah.
they're listening to this podcast in the first place, right?
Yeah.
And just on that, because I see this so many times with people, they're in their head and they want to follow their heart, and they are terrified
Mhm.
because there's no logic to it, and there's a feeling of having to lose control and surrender and let go and allow that. Like, what allowed you to really go in that path? Like, what is it around connection with spirit, the deepening that's able to give you the courage to relinquish control, surrender? Like, what are the elements you found that have helped you along this path? I'm standing here right now in Lake Taupo in a beautiful retreat space. And there's a vast difference between an intellectual experience and passive listening to a fully embodied lived experience. Because that's what retreats can do. They can help you land, start to truly reconnect to yourself, to others, to nature, and to spirit as well. There's so much in it. That's why we created Live in Flow, and that's why we are so passionate about getting this work out there and bringing people together. If you want to find out more when our next retreat or event is coming up, just check out the link below. And now, back to the podcast.
Well, first it was trust. Like I had to learn to trust myself and trust my intuition and trust spirit to guide me versus control, right? And I definitely struggled with the fear. Like for me, the fear was around losing credibility and whether other people were going to accept me or not accept me, right? So that's like one big thing that people face is like, am I going to be judged? And so I had to face that, and I realized ultimately that if I accept myself and I'm not judging myself, then I don't really need to be so concerned about other people's judgment, right? Their judgment is that's their business. It's not my business. And I don't need to let their judgment become my reality, right? If I know myself, then that they're like I have less attachment to what other people think of me because I know myself, right? And so for me, through my journey with Kabbalah and the mystery school, like it really helped me to come to that place of knowing thyself and healing and kind of peeling away the layers of the onion where I had attachments or fears of not being enough, not being capable, right? Like having, shifting out of running on fear and into having greater courage to be true to myself and what, I knew was true in my heart, but then to, take the action steps to take the leaps of faith, and jump outside the norm, yeah, I mean, I get that. Like that was a huge struggle. So for me, it was baby steps, I think. Like I just realized like on one hand, I might not I mean, I realized at the time I might not even survive my PhD program if I don't make a change, right? So it was really like it came down to my well-being really depends on this. And then as I started pursuing it, I realized how much more joy I was getting out of it. Whereas, my work in standard science was just kind of zapping my joy. And so I had this juxtaposition of doing two things at once, and I kept them very separate in my life for many years. But I continued to get more joy as I followed my heart. Uh, and, but life has a way also of guiding us. So, like for example, I tried to leave science multiple times, especially when I knew, oh, I just want to go follow my heart. I just want to go, like, maybe I can do some research in consciousness or do something that just feels more like aligned with where I'm at now. And I did try to leave, grad school and not finish the PhD at one point. And life just continued to steer, right? So I also was, I learned to develop a relationship with the universe, I call it, or my spirit guides, different people call it different things. But be more open and receptive to the signs. Like I would ask for, give me a sign, help me find my way. Cause if I felt like I'm not sure if this is the right step. I didn't always trust my inner sort of intuition or what I was getting. And so I would ask for outside signs and ask the universe to kind of work with me and help guide me. And then synchronicities would show up that I was like, okay, that gave me like the validation that I needed to go, yeah, this is right. It feels right. And now I'm getting the outer sign that this is right. So I think it was like this combination of, anytime, and this is something that I teach in my the I Quantum changes course, right? That as we're going through change, we always start in what's familiar, what's comfortable, right? The sphere that we can control. But anytime we want to grow, right? Because you're in your comfort zone, you're not really going to grow. Or something comes along and it brings change, right? And you start moving out of what's familiar and comfortable and into this unknown space, right? The space of uncertainty and the unknown. And that's when most people, their fears might kick up, right? Because they start thinking about all the possibilities of what's going to happen, but then the ego mind tends to go towards the worst case scenarios, right? So they're trying to figure out all the worst case scenarios, what might happen. And then there's a question of whether they can trust themselves to handle those scenarios. And so the fear and the anxiety really kicks up. But there are other people who can move into the fear zone and feel energized by it or get a little bit of an adrenaline rush from it, and they take it head on. They're more like the warrior types versus the timid types, right? So you get these different types of people and they handle fear differently. But as I, started exploring more into the principles of quantum physics and what does that mean if we were to look at that as a philosophical framework for our lives? There is this principle of uncertainty that, in a quantum perspective, if I can learn to work with it from a higher state of consciousness, it actually gives me a lot of opportunity to decide what I want to create. So rather than fearing the possibilities, I can get co-creative with the possibilities and choose like how, from a more optimistic place of this is what I want to create. How am I going to now move forward with that and then, do the work. So we go through this, we have to face the fear first. And then as you move through the fear, you start learning new things, right? You move into this learning zone and learning new skills, learning new things about yourself, learning new things about the world, if, depending on what you're exploring into. And then as you learn, you grow, right? And then you move into the growth zone, but there's more zones beyond that, right? So I look at, the quantum physics principles as giving us another framework within which we can even move beyond a growth zone and into a quantum zone where we really start to thrive amidst uncertainty rather than, fearing it or going through any kind of anxiety. But yeah, it ultimately takes courage, right? I had to have courage to just know myself and be myself, right? And but I also felt like by being part of a community of people who get you, like where you're like, oh, okay, these folks, they understand me and I can be me, right? Rather than having to hide me and I'm accepted and we have a common sort of understanding and that, we can encourage each other in our growth, right? So you have to be kind of part of a community of people who they're on the growth journey with you and you can support each other even if other people in your life don't get it or might even try to make you wrong for growing because now you're changing the dynamic because you're transforming and some people don't if they're not ready to transform themselves and they may not like it, right?
Yeah, no, community is critical, isn't it? The people that inspire you, lift you up, not hold you back and peg you down because they feel threatened in their own life. I mean, that
Exactly.
happens all too often. I'm
Yeah.
curious as well with your science background. Because as you were speaking then, like how much of that science actually you could take comfort from or courage from to apply into spirituality with the crossovers that were there?
Well, that's been my journey to discover is like, can there be complementarity here between science and spirit, or are they actually opposed, right? And I think that the standard sort of assumption, and this kind of comes back to what we started with, is like, has knowledge been suppressed? Yeah, the more I explored into science and the history of science, the more I started to realize that there was actually a suppression of the truth of what actually happened in the scientific revolution and the founding of the scientific, like the Royal Society, for example, that the whole modern day industry of science was birthed from. And it turns out that, so in history of science, they might say, oh, this is, the alchemists were just charlatans. And yeah, science kind of emerged from it, medicine kind of emerged from it. But we all know that it was just pseudoscience and it's not, so they wave it away and they give you this negative bias against it. And so this is a reason why science and spirit just, spirit is even becoming, it's even questioned in today's materialist sort of paradigm. Is spirit even a thing, or is it just your imagination, or just your belief, right? And but in the origins of science, the most of those scientists who, like Isaac Newton and Kepler and Francis Bacon, like a lot of these original scientists who brought us into our modern day way of operating in science, they were alchemists. They were deeply spiritual people, and they thought very deeply about things. And to them, science was a way of understanding the mind of God. It was a devotional act. They thought that this is what brings me closer to God, not further away from. And so as I've explored more and more into science, and I see like the beauty of like just, we call it the fine tuning of our universe, that all these parameters of our universe from a physics perspective, like even things like the mass of an electron, or something they call the fine structure constant, or the expansion level of our universe. I mean, the amount of total mass in the universe, like all of these things put us just in the Goldilocks zone that allows for life to come to be in this universe, intelligent life to come to be. Everything is just so finely tuned, and so it just continues to connect, that it's just like it's too beautiful and it's too perfect to not be intelligent, right? And so to me, the more I've explored, the more I realize there's got to be intelligence behind all of this. And then as I explored deeply into the ancient wisdom teachings from various mystery traditions, the more I could see, like, oh, these guys were saying the same thing that our modern day scientists are saying. They just had a metaphorical language for it, but it's the same essence, same kind of concept if you can grasp it. And now modern science is discovering it from a mathematical perspective. And so, we're coming back together again between the science, the consciousness, the spirit, the ancient wisdom. Like they perfectly complement each other beautifully versus being in conflict. And that's why I like the ancient mystery teachings and wisdom teachings, is that it's not about religious dogma and blind faith. It's actually about really asking the deeper questions and trying to understand the universe, how it works, our place in it, who are we, how do we operate, what brought us here, why are we here, all of these types of things. These are deep questions that ancient, you know, mystics were asking, ancient metaphysicians were asking, the alchemists were asking, and modern science, is asking. And I think that humanity, if we can get back to that place of asking ourselves these deeper questions, rather than just taking things at face value, or just getting so caught up in the material, paradigm and the material way of life, like this is where meaning comes from. And when you have deeper sense of meaning in your life, it gives comfort, it brings comfort, but it also brings a sense of purpose. And purpose leads to a sense of joy. And when you know that when you're living your life in a way that feels like you're aligned with deeper purpose, that's what brings joy, right? But when you're living your life in a way that is out of alignment with that purpose, whether you're conscious of purpose or unconscious of it, a deeper part of you knows there's something else I'm supposed to be doing. But when you're out of alignment with it, that's what brings anxiety, right? That's what brings depression. Um, and and so and unfortunately, too many people are just turning when they feel like anxiety or depression, they're just turning to drugs, to numb out and mask it, or they're turning to alcohol, maybe, to mask it, rather than actually looking within and coming to know themselves and make the changes they need to make to create a life that they're going to love. Instead, they just continue to stay stuck in misery because of fear of change.
Yeah, it's wild, isn't it? It's just listening to you. It took me back because I think the first 30 years of my life, my default was travel. I would always resort to moving and non-committing because I couldn't understand the anxiety and depression that was building within me like a slow burn. And the stories I was telling myself, like it was crazy. And it wasn't until you, like you say, and having a deeper sense of spiritual connection has brought me so much peace, purpose, and joy. Those are the three things that have really blossom from it. And it's like, wow, you just want that for everyone else if they're ready to lean in at the end of
Yeah.
the day, you
And
know?
even if, I think it's definitely true. And I think the more and more we discover, the more and more it's coming to light that, yeah, consciousness is eternal. It exists beyond the body. We're not it's not over when this physical body dies. Like, we go on to the next, experience. And I think if people can, but even if, let's just say, right, that, okay, there's no spiritual existence. I know there is, but even if you just believe and live with that greater level of peace and comfort and sense of purpose and joy and meaning in your life while you're here, you're going to have lived a better life than you would if you were totally nihilistic and didn't believe in anything except for the material, right? And then it's all about the material gain versus it being about the inner fulfillment. And when we're always looking at material gain as our major goal, um, you're always chasing something outside of you, right? And that thing that you're chasing outside of you, it might bring you temporary satisfaction when you get it, but then but that only lasts for so long. And then you got to find the next thing, the next mountain to climb or whatever, the next trip to go on, or, the next adventure that kind of gives you that buzz. But when you instead start searching within and finding inner fulfillment, that's lasting. That becomes your new baseline for life. And having greater sense of peace, connection to the self, greater sense of connection to spirit, greater sense of joy and fulfillment. Like, when your baseline, your foundation of life becomes that, it only gets better from there, right? You can then, the things you choose to pursue from that foundation, now it's like, wow, the things I'm pursuing, like, they're amazing, and it's making a difference, and it's fulfilling me, and it's my creative expression, and I love it. So you get to create the life that you will love living, and have even greater joy as a result.
Exactly. Is science embracing this like it does like in mainstream is consciousness getting studied these deeper mysteries of the universe, or is it because like I mean I've had a podcast for 10 years almost, right, and everyone I speak to always seems to be left at the middle. They're always on the fringe, or they've had to release it or do it in a very different way. And there's people out there that have big profiles that are steeped in academia, and I struggle to listen to it because it's just so in their head. That doesn't
Yeah,
have.
super mental. Yeah.
Yeah, you
Well, I
know?
think that there's a shift that's been happening. So, like, when I was in grad school, there wasn't enough interdisciplinary uh, fields, at least not from a physics perspective. It was just starting, right? It was just like the frontier, but it wasn't quite accepted yet to have these interdisciplinary studies. So, for example, biophysics, right? So biology and the physics of biology, like, that was sort of just starting when I was in grad school, which was in the more earlier 2000s. And there just wasn't enough funding around it and all this kind of thing. Today, it's like it's the hot topics, right? And the quantum correlates of consciousness is starting to become the next frontier. And so there is more interest coming. There is more evidence coming. And I think there's also a younger generation who grew up with the internet and got exposed to a lot more alternative ideas. And they're a little more independent thinking, maybe, than the boomer generation, for example. And they're not just sort of sitting back when their teachers say, well, that's not, we're not going to talk about that here. That's too philosophical, or that's, not our domain. It's like the consciousness conversation is not getting pushed into the closet anymore like it used to. And so that's just since I left grad school. So I finished in 2008 was when I finished my PhD. And since that time, there's more and more openness, I think, even in, like when I looked at people who were my role models, when I was in grad school, I saw that all of the physicists who ultimately went into studying consciousness or spiritual things, they waited until they were retired and they
Huh.
were an emeritus professor before they came out about and published their books about, science of consciousness or the physics of consciousness. Now, today, you see professors who are very much in their, tenure, or they're still actively in academia, and they're far more willing to be putting their reputations on the line and be public about it. So there has been a shift, both within some of the professorship as well as the students coming through today. Like, they're asking more questions, and especially with their ability to search for themselves now. There's they're less willing to kind of have the wool pulled over and like, let's just move on. So I do think there's more research coming in, and I think that consciousness is one of those questions that, as much as neuroscience is trying to study it from is it the neurons in the brain kind of phenomenon, it does, there's a lot of hard, there's the hard problem, there's the binding problem, there's these problems that neuroscience can't really explain. And so there's more and more reaching towards, could there be the quantum phenomenon? Could there be an energetic component that synchronizes consciousness within us? There's more scientists who are saying, no, maybe consciousness is the primary, and the brain is just like a radio receiver or a computer, that kind of receives and can maybe process and transmit as well. We don't need a neural link. We just need to learn to access a higher state of consciousness to get plugged into the unified field, so to speak. And so there's more study of that. So I do think science is coming around, but it's just, it spent a couple hundred years in this materialist paradigm.
Totally.
That it's an old, those old paradigms. What do they say in scientific revolutions? That for the revolution to happen, Thomas Kuhn, famously said that the old generation has to die off or retire before the new paradigm can really take root within science. But right now, we are moving through multiple revolutions in different fields of science all simultaneously. So there's definitely a shift that's happening.
Yeah, no, this whole thing fascinates me. Only it's through my own personal journey as well, because honestly, I've literally felt my body changing over the years. Like something has been going on as if it's developing a different sensory perception. I had energy moving up my spine. I later learned that Kundalini was awakening, and then that started to kick into gear, and then going beyond the five senses. And it's like something has happened. You know it, you feel it, this internal. And I was like, well, why isn't that being studied? Why aren't people exploring and making this known as well? Because it would have certainly saved me a lot of anxiety when it first started happening, and trying to figure out what the hell was going on at the same time.
Well, I think some of it has been studied. I just think that there's not a lot of funding for it, right? So I think a
Right.
lot of people
Yeah.
don't realize how much money drives scientific research. It's all based on what you can get funding for. So we need there to be more, like the funding organizations need to get interested in consciousness. to, be able to like drive that. And I do think that it's starting to happen. I mean, the whole stuff that's coming out right now around psionics and psi phenomenon, like like the psi games, it's gonna, there's a shift that's about to happen, that's going to bring consciousness into more and more of the mainstream conversation.
The psionics, you said? What is that? I'm
Yeah,
not hearing that.
psionics. So, well, this gets into some of the UAP disclosure stuff that's
Ah,
happening, right?
okay.
So, it's been, you know, claimed by pretty credible people within government positions and within private aerospace and so forth that have been part of this mm, UAP crash retrieval kind of program, that part of what's been developed, even back to the MK Ultra time and the 60s and the 70s, that they were doing research into things like remote viewing and the ability to travel and project out of body and so forth. Well, they've developed it to a point where they can actually use consciousness to summon the phenomenon, or whether that phenomenon is a UFO, UAP type thing, or it's some orb that's just kind of manifesting out of some other dimension. So psychic kind of telepathic, let's say, communication, and then you add on top of that. So the fact that psionic, they're calling it psionic assets. Which is highly telepathic and psychic people, essentially, is just a technical term that they use, are being, utilized to access this phenomenon, whatever is the source of it, and or the sources. I don't think it's just one source. And then on top of that, you have like the telepathy tapes that have come out. Have you listened to the telepathy tapes at all?
I've heard a lot of people talk about them. I've heard it on other podcasts, but not the tapes themselves.
They
Yeah.
are it's worth listening to at least season one of the
Okay.
telepathy tapes. They are so inspiring. But it's showing that, okay, these people who are highly autistic, like non-speaking autistics, um, developed a different capacity within themselves to communicate. They couldn't control their bodies enough to communicate with words, so they had to find other, like they evolved in a way to find a different way to communicate, and their way of communicating is telepathically. And there's been a lot of studies that have been, testing, is this for real, or are they somehow influencing each other or cheating, or, like, how is this happening? And there's been a lot of studies that have been going on. And that's what's described in the telepathy tapes. And they're showing 100% accuracy of telepathy on some of this stuff. I mean, it's really remarkable. And then, they're discovering that these kids, like the mainstream sort of doctors were telling them, oh, they're not really in there. They're, their brains don't really work. They're kind of like a vegetable, they're just going to be like a child in a grown, person's body. But it's turning out that actually they're extremely wise and humble and highly spiritually connected. And they're just in a body that doesn't really function so well and doesn't really obey their will so well. And, but they're highly intelligent, right? So there's this intelligence that's being discovered in as they, learn to communicate in different ways. And there's even training that some of them have gone through with something like, I think it's called vision without eyes, or seeing without eyes, something
Yeah.
like, and mindfold, and that they can train, and anyone can train themselves to
I'm
develop these.
doing it. I'm doing it with my daughter at the moment.
Oh,
My
awesome.
6-year-old daughter. Yeah, she literally. We've had. She's had 2 sessions, and she can already. The portal's open behind a mask, and she's identifying all the different colors. No problem every time.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
that's
what
amazing.
it's
And
amazing.
yeah, and so I would say season one of Telepathy Tapes is so worth everybody listening to, because
Okay.
it's just really inspiring, and it gets, by the end, it gets, into the spiritual kind of topic as well. And and then that has kicked off another thing, right? So then there's the Psy games that are coming out. This man Hakeem Jeffries, I think is the last name. He just, it's all synchronicity. It's not really about him, but he just decided we need to help people wake up to the fact that this is real, that these psychic abilities are a real thing. And, there's nothing like seeing it with your own eyes that convinces somebody. And so he ultimately is organizing these things called the Psi Games, which is bringing people with these talents to perform basically under, tests and blindfold and all these different ways of on a stage in front of, hundreds of people, showing them that this is real. And so that is, I think they are just about to do their second Psi Games in Virginia the first weekend of August. And and then it'll be coming to the UK, I believe, next year as well.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's going to start gaining steam, I think. So, there's more and more. And then of course, you have like noetic science and Dean Radin and all the research that they've done from a very scientific perspective, kind of as a nonprofit, sort of self-funding through donations to do the research on this phenomenon. And they're showing some very solid, rigorous research using double slit experiments and so forth from quantum physics, that consciousness can remotely influence the quantum field, and this is a real thing, right? So I think that the next stage is going to be, we move beyond questioning whether these gifts or the phenomenon and psychic abilities are real or not. And we're going to stop moving beyond, we're going to move beyond, I hope, this like, oh, we got to prove it to ourselves if it's real or not, and move into what are the implications of it? What does it mean? If we can develop this, if this is part of our innate human capacity and we can develop this, what are we going to do with it? How are we going to use it in a way that fulfills a greater good and a higher purpose, rather than just using it, kind of the way it's been getting used, like by psionic kind of, efforts, or the old remote viewing kind of stuff that they did to spy on our enemy, countries or whatever. I mean, wait, there's a better way to use these gifts and I think that this is a big part of knowledge that's been suppressed, is that everybody has this capacity within them, and instead it's been stigmatized, and there's been fear created around it, and whether it's coming from a religious angle, like, oh, it's of the devil, or it's coming from an academic angle and the scientific of, oh no, that's just hogwash and pseudo whatever, and or it's coming from the media trying to just stigmatize and ridicule anyone, and attack their credibility if they explore into this. But I think there's less and less, um, people aren't backing down now. Like the rigorous scientists are just saying, I don't care what they think, I'm going to come forward with this because I know it's true. And so, I think we're living in a very, very exciting time personally. It's kind of chaotic out there and there's a lot of crazy things happening, but it's also like in that there is a new paradigm that is emerging, and it looks, really empowering if people are willing to open up their minds to greater possibilities.
That's what it boils down to, isn't it? It's like yes, we need discernment. Yes, there's so much information out there, but with that riches of information, we can actually explore this at depths and an understanding that wouldn't have been possible many years ago. So it's
Yeah.
very exciting, I think.
Yeah.
Last question for you as well before we wrap up the podcast is, how do you apply these things in your own life on a daily basis? How do you ensure that you don't get lost in the mind and the information, but you're actually applying it and living it and breathing it and through that as well? How does that
Yeah.
look for you?
Well, I start every day with, once I kind of am awake and I've showered and stuff, and I've gotten myself sort of ready for the day. I have a practice that I do, like a spiritual practice that involves a certain set of like rituals, and connecting to spirit and calling in, the energy to support me through the day. And so I probably spent, about 20 minutes every morning doing that. And then there'll be some time for, contemplation and some meditation. And also in the evening, I spend like probably another 15 minutes just kind of resettling my energy at the end of the day so that I can, get good quality sleep and not just be like, because for me, I mean, my mind is very active. So if I don't like recenter myself, I won't fall asleep because I'll just be like up thinking about things. So, yeah, so I bookend my day with a spiritual practice, and that has made all the difference. I mean, that's some of the things that I've
Mm.
learned with the Modern Mystery School is this sort of formula of tools that we can use on a daily basis that really works. And it can be subtle at times, but I find that when I do it first thing in the morning before I do the rest of my day, I find that everything flows better. I stay focused more. I get more done. I'll be more in a flow with events of the day. So even if I'm like, oh, I'm running late, but I arrived perfectly on time because other people were running late too. It's just everything flows more, and I feel more in tune with the universe guiding things versus just, the frustration. So when I wouldn't do rituals, it's like there'd be more distraction. I'd get, more like agitated, that things weren't flowing right, or I wouldn't accomplish as much. So I started to see very quickly, as I started working with these practices, that it made a huge difference in the quality of my day-to-day life. And I think that that helps us come back to our center, right? It's a way to recenter oneself and start within versus just, oh, I got to do all these things that are about my outer world. And your I mean, from a quantum perspective, this is one of the things that we teach within the Quantum Learning Academy, and our quantum events, is like we are constantly informing the quantum field. And in our thoughts, in our words, in our actions, we're constantly informing. And the quantum field takes that information and kind of gives you your possibilities back based on what information you're giving it. And how do we get more in, greater self mastery so that we can work with that in a positive way? And make sure that we're creating the kind of life that we want to create. And our words definitely inform. So we have to be careful, like the words we're saying, and becoming conscious of your meta language, like your subconscious, the things that you say to yourself and the things you may say to others that if you're not aware of what you're saying, you just have to listen to the words that are coming out of your mouth, and it will reveal whether you're coming from a negative outlook or a positive outlook, whether you're self-defeating or whether you believe in yourself. I mean, all of this is, I think, really important aspect of
Big time.
shifting it and then choosing your words more wisely so that you can inform yourself and the quantum field and all of this, like in terms of what it is you really want to create.
I would often joke, imagine you could have somebody follow you around with a video camera for the day and
Mhm.
record every word spoken, record every thought, record every feeling,
Yeah.
and played back to you at the end of each day. And it would soon highlight to where we keep going back into
Yeah.
those old
In the
programs.
in the Kabbalah courses that I teach, one of the things I recommend people do is to just for one day, because how you do anything is how you do everything. So
Mm.
we're very habitual, repetitive people. And that's part of our animal nature, which all forms our neural wiring, right? Because your neurons fire based on repetition. So you have your habits and your ways of doing things. And so how you do anything is how you do everything. If you want to get a good look at your foundation, your subconscious sort of pattern and programming, just take one day of your life, take a journal, write down everything you think, everything you say, everything you do. And it doesn't need to, just like quick little thing, right? Or you could record it, but it'll give you a real clear reflection and
Yeah.
mirror to what your pattern is, that you're constantly in rewiring in yourself and informing, into the field, what it is you want to create.
Totally, totally. And what's in the pipeline? Have you got anything coming up, or where? And what can people find out more about you anyway? Where can
Yeah,
we send
thank
them
you.
as well?
So, best place to find out about everything that I'm doing is at my website, teresabullard.com. And then some of the newer stuff that I'm doing with my husband, we have called the Quantum Learning Academy. So our website is quantumlearningacademy.co, not .com, but .co. And we have, really exciting things coming up. We've been creating these iQuantum, it's like a series of retreats, immersive retreats that are taking different aspects of our transformational journey, but looking at it through the lens of quantum principles and comparing that to classical physics and like old paradigm versus new paradigm, and how we can, use this as a framework to reorient our approach, not just from a mental place, but from a felt place, right? And it includes certain types of meditations and practices and an awakening experience process that people go through. So, and then I'm also doing my mystery school work, which is, initiating people into the ancient mystery teachings. So it's kind of like one's more sort of the new paradigm kind of quantum framework, and the other is more the ancient wisdom. But both, kind of weave back and forth as well. And so in December, let's see, I have in September, actually in the UK, I'll be doing something called Empowerment Week. And then sometime next year, I'll do one or two as well. Um, Possibly one in March in the US. I'm still kind of figuring out my schedule for 2027. But Empowerment Week is a week-long immersive process with me that goes into the ancient mystery teachings, and it builds up to an initiation process where people are getting initiated into the ancient sort of hermetic and lineage and mystery school, modern mystery school lineage. And then in December in Los Angeles, Los Angeles or Long Beach area, we'll be running an iQuantum Awakening. So that'll be with the Quantum Learning Academy, my husband and I. And the Awakening is a 4-day immersive retreat where we cover all of the quantum principles. So there's 7 principles that we cover through those 4 days. And it's a deep dive into who are we, what are we made of from a physical level, and how does that then connect down to the quantum, so that you can recognize how you really are a quantum being and then awaken to that, right? So it's an experiential process that we take people through to actually awaken to and really understand what it takes to access the quantum field. Because there's a lot of people out there who talk quantum these days, and they're kind of using it very loosely as a, well, it's law of attraction, therefore it's quantum. But that's not what I mean by quantum, right? I'm coming from actually having a place of understanding the principles of quantum physics, and but then extrapolating that and saying, okay, how does that apply to consciousness? How does that apply to us? How can we work with that in our own lives? And so we'll be running in December an event in iQuantum Awakening event in Long Beach. And then in April of 2027, we'll be running one, both the Awakening as well as iQuantum Changes, where we're talking about the change process, but from a quantum perspective. That'll be in Florida. We're looking at kind of I think it'll be in Clearwater, Florida area. So those are some of the things that I have coming up, and then there will always be more. So I'd recommend people get on the newsletter if they're interested in following, because
Of
that'll
course.
always be the best way to, or even social media. They can follow me at Dr. Theresa Bullard on Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah, you got a lot going on. I almost wish there was a quantum time machine or something that we could just flip between countries at a blink.
Yeah, yeah. About being multidimensional.
Exactly, exactly. A beautiful podcast. I really enjoyed. Thank you so much for coming on. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
everything you're doing.
Yeah.
That was
Thank you,
awesome.
guys. Thank
Thank
you.
you,
It's been a
Teresa.
pleasure.